Hi, this is Issie Barratt. I'm the Artistic Director of the National Youth Jazz Collective, and you nearly didn't see me then because I wasn't quite ready. Welcome to hashtag National Youth Jazz Wednesday, and another opportunity for us to talk to some of our dearest colleagues and friends about their creativity, how they got to where they're going to, and where they're going to next. So today I'm thrilled to welcome to our conversation two very dear friends of NYJC. We've got Teena Lyle. Hi, Teena.
Hiya. Hi, how you doing?
How you doing? Great, thanks. Lovely to see you. And San Francisco.
Or the Severn Bridge, depending on how you feel.
We'll go fly between the two. And then Mark Hodgson. Hi, lovey. Nice to see you.
Hello, nice to see you. Yeah.
How you doing?
I'm nowhere as exotic as that, I'm afraid.
So just to contextualise, both of you, your sort of relationship with NYJC, for people that aren't familiar with NYJC, Teena and Mark are both tutors on the summer school, and you'll both be teaching with us this year. And Mark, you've done a number of summer schools in the previous 13 years, as well as some of the regional work we've done. And Teena, you did the short course last year as well, which was a really great way of meeting us and seeing how the work turns out. So I know that whenever we talk to our young musicians, they're very keen to know how all of the tutors got into the music and what they were doing at their age. So I was wondering whether, first of all, Mark, you might tell us about, if you sort of cast your mind's eye back to when you were 14 to 18, what were you doing that sort of contributed to your musical journey and where you are now?
Right, 14 to 18. So I probably started when I was about 13 or 14, perhaps 12, 13, yeah, perhaps 13, perhaps let's go for 13. My father was a musician, and he was a economist actually, but a semi-professional musician. So he, instead of stories when I was a kid, he would sing me songs. He was a folk musician, so he would play folk songs. So I always had music around, but I wasn't taught, didn't have any lessons as such, and sort of took it up myself, aged about 13, yeah, like I say. I had some friends who were into jazz actually, so I got into jazz quite quickly. Wow. Yeah, I was very lucky. Initially, I was attracted by sort of rock and funk music, and which I still am. But they were into jazz, and I just thought, oh, jazz is it seems very interesting. And I was looking for something that was stimulating beyond something challenging, I think is the best way to put it. And so I sort of followed them around, and I was friends with one of the brothers, and then eventually, the bass player left, and I joined, and so I had. In terms of lessons, I was quite self-taught in many ways. I had a couple of lessons on double bass, which I then went on to play later, but I started on electric bass.
Right.
So that's, yeah, but it's sort of in front of the mirror, kind of electric bass and that kind of stuff. And a tennis racket actually before the electric bass, which I diligently took the strings off to have four. Yeah, that's the level of precision you're dealing with here. I did that, and I played, just listened to the radio and played along with Top of the Pops, which was popular then, and the radio, and tried to pick tunes out, and very much entertainment. And then I realized I had a kind of aptitude and some skill at it, so I pursued it further and practiced harder, and talked to these older musicians about what I should practice and what I should listen to, and they gave me, and believe it or not, from the age of about 13 or 14, they gave me Keith Jarrett, Charlie Hayden, Alan Holdsworth records, all kinds of, and lots of great classical music and stuff. So I was exposed to that quite quickly and took a shine to it. I didn't know what was going on, but I liked the energy. And some Coltrane as well. Just loved, whether it was Wagner or Prokofiev or Weather Report. It was just the energy that I liked. I couldn't really understand the harmony.
So that love of the different genres that's always been present, or even
and my father singing me folk music when I was a kid. So I don't really. It's the emotional effect of it rather than the style that interests me, and the mechanics and the sort of DNA of it, rather than the name on the section in the CD store,
And before we go to find out about what Teena was up to at 14 to 18. Were you basically sort of self-motivated and doing a lot of this yourself? Was school or the music service part of this journey?
There wasn't. I went to quite a highly regarded school, but the music department was awful. It was some sort of portaloos out at the back of the, and some guitars with sort of 5 strings on, which would have suited me given the tennis racket story. But Yeah, they didn't. No, he didn't. But these friends were great, and that in a way it sort of circumvented the traditional what you might consider on those days was quite a dry route. So I got into it, and there's something about finding it out yourself. And I joined a record library, and so I'd find a Weather Report album that had Joe Zawinul on, obviously, and then I'd go and find a Cannibal Adderley album. I thought, oh well, it's got Joe Zawinul on, so that'll be worth it. And then Cannibal Adderley play with Miles, and then all those. And because the record library was well equipped, I could just take them out and follow these lines without having to pay for them.
This record library sort of route is something that's come up a lot with the tutors that we've talked to, who are sort of our generation and older. So it seems to have been a really seminal, a Joe seminal to get the together.
Yeah, nice.
Portaloos, were they in E flat, B flat, or concert?
Oh, they were the transposing Portaloos.
So Teena, what were you doing between 14 and 18 that was sort of contribute to the age of the youngsters that we work with? That's really why they're asking.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose when I first got into jazz, it was a little bit earlier than that, because my dad brought home this box full of 45 records. That's vinyl records, kids. And there was one in there which was Desafinado, played by Stan Getz, and I'd bought a vibraphone home because I'd been pushed off the piano in a big band when I was about 12 or 13, and I was just working it all out by ear. So I sort of, by the time I was 14, I was in a big band, a youth big band, playing piano and bass lines because we didn't have a bass player, and sometimes playing the vibes or congas. So I was already in there doing that. We did the National Youth Music Festival, I think. It was done at the Albert Hall. And so I was really keen on it. And we were traveling to Germany and sort of twin towns, I suppose, in Europe, doing concerts and things like that. So a lot of my jazz know-how, I suppose, came from playing all of the charts in the big band pad. Sammy Nestico, Basie, Kid from Red Bank, things like that, which at the time, if I'd known anything about jazz properly, I'd probably run screaming. But when I finally learned that was okay. So I was already doing a big band, and I was out doing sort of weddings, pop bands and things like that. Also I was in church, in the choir, singing and being assistant organist and head chorister. So I was interested in that side. And because I was so active in music in the borough, I was out every night. So for example, Monday night was wind band, Tuesday night was symphony orchestra. So wind band would have been percussion and timps and maybe bassoon, which I was playing at the time. Symphony orchestra would have been timps and percussion. Wednesday was brass band, that would have been timps. Thursday was big band, so that would have been vibraphone, congas and piano and some singing. Friday was choir practice and organ practice. Saturday was music school all morning, and Saturday afternoon was singing at weddings and earning money playing for weddings on the organ, and Sunday was singing for the service. So I was like all over the place. So trying to find enough time to listen to jazz wasn't always possible, but I was getting enough, because I think I wouldn't have been satisfied unless I was playing other types of stuff, other styles, I suppose.
So that's already, we've hit the sort of the common ground, which we mentioned we're going to talk about. We've already sort of seen how diverse all the different genres were in your teen years, both of you. So I'm wondering if we might actually go straight for the sort of the in-depth conversation about genres and different styles, because I know as a composer and arranger as well that I often get asked about, my engagement with different styles, and for me it's just sound, and I'm wondering how you both sort of maneuvered that, especially when you're in your formative years and talking about it and different people's opinions and the way that you now operate. So first of all, Mark, so how do you see yourself, because you're maybe to give a bit of an outline of the different genres that you're currently playing, and maybe how you maneuver yourself through them all. I know the youngsters would really love to hear that. because it's a question that they're asking a lot.
Okay, well, so it's become more interesting recently, actually. I've always played electric and double bass, but some people know me as primarily a sort of jazz double bass player. Some people know me as an electric studio player, yeah, I mean, playing that kind of music. I just recorded actually a solo electric bass album in the last months. So that's a thing, with all kinds of sounds and loops and atmospheres and all kinds of electronics and stuff. So I love that. I mean, in fact, today I've just been transcribing some Jay Dilla, you know, the hip hop artist, and that, interestingly, when I was driving somewhere this morning, I was listening to some Coltrane, and those two things, I'm not saying they're the same, but they're music. You know, it's like speaking French or English. I think I'm the same person. I'm maybe less communicative in French, but I still hold the same beliefs. And so music of any genre has far more similarity than it does differences. And I think people get sort of hung up on, it's quite easy to get hung up on that. Inevitably, because of the industry, people see you as a certain thing, and they think that potentially diversity can be watering down your skill set, you know, if you do too many things. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. There are a lot of great musicians who can, you know, who can really play very well in lots of styles. It's not, I don't think it's a problem. I think they understand the nature of music and the nature of, ultimately for me, music is sound and time and expression. And those things are constant in every music, from Baroque to you know, to hip hop.
Do you find yourself having to adapt how you think about things in different groups, maybe more the different groups that go from genre to genre rather than necessarily the music itself as well?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, there is some kind of conceptual and technical understanding required of the different styles. You know, it's not, I mean, I'm talking kind of you know, quite romantically about it, but ultimately you do have to know how those styles work, and how, as a bass player, how the bass functions in those roles. So if I go from playing trio, where it's very counter melodic, to a groove thing where it's ultimately about providing the sort of earth to the music, that takes a shift of concept and hat, if you like, place, you know, understanding. And that's really that's the key, is to understand the mechanics of the differences and mechanical differences, but maintain yourself through it.
And what's being asked of you in the now, really, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I'd say the big thing is to give the music the due respect, and actually play that music, and not think, well, I'm a jazz musician, so I need to prove that when I'm doing something else. Because the last thing, if you go and do a groove track, the last thing anyone wants to hear is you noodling around in the extensions of the chords. As good as that might be, but you've got to be careful, you know. So it's just understanding how different relationships, as you would have with people, you do different things in different contexts.
Brilliant. I love that description. That's really nailed it.
Which one's that?
The way that you've described about, you know, really thinking about what's needed for that music then, and to give it the same amount of care and attention to detail, and like you say, not try and prove yourself in one area when that's not needed.
Yeah, the proving yourself is a really difficult thing that I think everyone needs to come to grips with at some point, because inevitably, I like to be liked, but the way to achieve it isn't necessarily through showing off all your abilities in one fell swoop, you know.
Brilliant. Teena, what about your involvement? And maybe if you could sort of tell a few, when you're sort of talking about the different genres, sort of illustrate them a little bit with sort of mentioning some musicians or composers.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've never been satisfied with playing just one style of music. That for some reason, that's how it worked for me. Probably because I kept switching from one discipline to another discipline. I think when it comes to, for me, different genre and mentally how to approach each genre, it's always going to be heart over head to begin with for me. So it's always going to be about how the music should feel when you're playing it. There was a very funny thing I saw on a social media thing where somebody said, why is it when people play Bach, their heads go all jerky? And this whole thing of it's like, I do it. It's about how it feels, and it's about the quality of the attack of the notes in something like Bach, and the length of the notes and how you blend in with the rest of the chamber orchestra. Something like Bach is, even though there are jazz musicians that have played Bach very successfully, Chick Corea, Keith Jarrett, they play it beautifully, and they still don't try, as Mark was saying, they don't try to sound like jazz musicians playing Bach or Mozart. They literally go into what's demanded of that style and that sound at the time and that feeling. Whereas something like one of my favorites, because I'm a big Pat Metheny fan, and Lyle Mays, I always felt with them when I play Lyle Mays or Pat Metheny, sounds very pretentious, but I feel it's music you could almost draw. You could paint it, and it's a state of mind. Mm-hmm. It's a feeling, it's a state of mind, and it does sound pretentious, but I can't interpret it any other way. And there's a particular feeling I get when I play a melody of Pat Metheny's that just makes all the emotions well up inside me. And I put all of that into trying to make that music authentic. There are different qualities, obviously, in choral music, and there's still different styles in choral music. I'm very much into choral music. I write it and sing it. And singing a piece of Palestrina or Tallis, you need to use another totally different technique and sound to, if you're going to be doing a piece of, I don't know, Bizet or something like that, which is going to be much more operatic. So I find that hopping across styles, you can't really bring classical into jazz or jazz into classical. The only thing I would say, mind you, someone's probably going to tell me you can. One thing I would say is I've noticed, having done classical piano, going back to some of the classics, knowing what I feel when I play jazz and how I personally interpret things, going back into the classical things and still respecting the composer's needs and markings and standard of what people normally expect from these composers. I still feel I've been given this extra gift to interpret the classical music the way I really want to, because of what I felt in jazz.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that I would cross over and try and make it jazzy.
Do either of you ever, so for example, you know, I've in a few small group situations, I've found that, you know, it's been really nice to take a Dowland song, and that does work quite nice and intimately with a jazz singer and just a double bass and just as a duo, you know, for a moment, or a Butterworth song, or, you know, how Brad takes Radiohead and has done a lot of that. And then there's that lovely Personal Standards from Tim Whitehead quite a while ago, where he took lots of pop songs and made them into his own. And I'm wondering if there are any of those literal cross-pollinations that have been going on for both of you. Maybe Mark, might we start with you? Where have there been any situations where you've done that kind of taking one and applying it to the other? Yeah,
I think there have. Yeah, Julian and Joseph and I did something with the Six. You know, the is it the Six? I can't remember the
string.
Harry, the 16.
Yeah.
I knew it was a number. I knew there's a number with a 6 in. It's 60, 16 or 6.
More lucrative.
Yeah, we get paid more. Yeah, you're right. With 16, and it's very disrespectful not to remember their name. Anyway, and we were doing some Monteverdi and stuff. It was interesting. It's. I think Teena makes a really good point about when you go to play classical music or music that's different from jazz. Let's say jazz gives you an incredible gift, but it doesn't mean to say you should suddenly start jazzing it up.
Yeah.
whatever that means, which is the classic, you know, is a strange turn of phrase I never understood, because I actually think it means the other way. It means less jazzy. Anyway, yeah, I've done some of that. I've done things with orchestra, but they've always been written in such a way that allows the orchestra to be the orchestra and me to be me.
Oh, great. Like, can you give an example?
Well, we did, yeah. Julie and I did something with the Liverpool Phil recently. And he writes a lot of music that works with orchestra. Over the years, there's been loads and loads of things, but I never tried to be. I mean, I studied orchestral bass when I was a student, but I didn't.
Okay.
I have done it, but for me to go into an orchestral section would be silly and would be very disrespectful for that section who spent their lives perfecting that thing. But yeah, there are workarounds, if you will, but I don't think I'm not playing I'm not playing the 48 preludes, whatnot, or anything like that. You know, I'm just set up in such a way which I think is the best way to deal with that scenario.
So it sounds like the composer or the arranger's taken part of that consideration and sort of made it possible for that amalgamation.
Yeah, which is a great thing. Yeah, and all the examples are a bit like that. Yeah, otherwise I think you would possibly call someone else. You know, that ability to sort of straddle the various things is possibly what they want me to achieve, rather than just being a straight up sort of Dickie Bow bass player or a straight up jazz bass player.
Maybe that's something we'll talk about in a moment, actually, because you've hit a really good point about it is about personalities. It is very personal, the booking. For, you know, when we're all booked, it's about the personality, the musical personality. It's not just we've got this function, we need a bass player. But, you know, like you're saying, and you were booked on purpose for what you're bringing as a creative person.
I think that's an interest. Sorry,
yeah, go on.
I didn't interrupt you. I think that's a really good point. That takes a while to get to, that situation where people book you for you. And I think I spent a lot of the time we've talked about, you know, 14, 18, and then a little bit older, trying to be everything to everyone and failing to be anything to anyone. You know what I mean? And so I learned that the only real thing I could do was be myself, and that had inherent value, and that if I practiced and became good at it, that it would be valuable to somebody somewhere. And stuck to the things I liked, and were true to those sort of values of group interplay and providing function and support for other people, and so it's important to pursue that as well, and be, you know, have the courage of your convictions and not try and be everything to everyone. I think that can be a dangerous bring down, if that's of any interest.
So if you're just looking back at what you were saying about trying to be all things to all people, and you were trying, you know, involved in all sorts of different things. Do you think that sort of that variety, it still contributed towards getting to where you are now, or did it?
Yeah, most definitely. I'm more thinking in a jazz context, but in terms of non-jazz things, then it was, yeah, I didn't. Through all this comes a personality. Even when you're playing, you know, hip hop to jazz, there is still you in the process. And I've always been interested in music that somehow tapped into that. Okay, yeah. So effectively, I wanted to maintain that whatever I was asked to do, and that was the thing that I learned, rather than just completely disregarding any my feelings in any respect. And so I was going, what do you want from me? I have a bass, you know, I have a license for this bass. What do you want to do with it? And offering ideas, and all the best musicians I was ever around had respectfully offered ideas. Oh, perhaps this will work, because ultimately you're the one with the skill set. Yeah,
Teena, I think that's a really nice description of how you are as a musician as well. I think every time we work together, whatever the sort of the umbrella, the genre that we're talking about, it's definitely you. I definitely feel that it's Teena Lyle that I'm working with, and I'm wondering if you sort of had those similar epiphany moments that Mark's had along the way, and if you might share some of that with us.
Yeah, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I've always found that trying to sound like someone else trying to model yourself on someone else's sound. It's kind of a good learning curve to discover how other people play and how they get their sounds, maybe. But we all have our own fingerprint. I think that's the thing that a lot of people forget. They feel under pressure, or they put themselves under pressure to sound like somebody else who's either successful, or who they want to sound like, or who they think other people want them to sound like. I've never really felt that, because I've always wanted to be myself. Mainly because I'm not sure I could ever really totally and utterly clone someone else. Although I've been asked to sound like other people on occasion, like when I worked with 80s groups, needing me to sound like whoever they had at the time. I get that, and there are a lot of people that cover that very well. But for me, it was all about wanting to just make sure that it was authentic. Whatever came out of me was what I intended. And if it came out and it wasn't what I intended, that's a happy accident, as long as it works. But yeah, I've been asked before now, like, so what other vibes players have you listened to? And I have listened to a few, but I normally answer Miles Davis, or,
yeah.
That my mindset is about sounding more vocal, more horn-like than percussive, or wanting to sound like another vibes player who's out there already. So even if I do admire them. I admire Milt, for example. I like Milt Jackson. I love the sound of the MJQ. Things like that. I really love what other players do, but I'm still quite happy, thank you. Make my own sound.
It's a thing that comes up quite a lot, because during the summer school, I actually have tutorials with each of the youngsters, and it's basically to obviously find out how they feel things are going and check in with them, but also is there anything that they're realizing they could do with some helps, and it's really nice for them to have that opportunity to ask for that help in a sort of a conversation. And one of the things that I'm struck by is how many do, especially when they're sort of year 11, year 12, so sort of 16, 17, and they have this feeling of, oh, I'm not getting it right because I don't sound like that person, and they're talking about another peer. And it's really lovely to have that opportunity in a private conversation to say, but we don't want you to sound like that person, we want you to sound like you. And that's the brilliance of our music, is that we bring together different yous to get that lovely unique sound of the different personalities. We don't want everyone, we don't want a homogenized sound where everybody's sort of the same. And I think that takes a little while, especially if it's seen as a competitive art form in some respects. I think it takes a little while. I'm wondering if we might talk about that competitive side, because I know it is something that we work really hard at NYJC not to cultivate, and the way that we run things, that sort of the alpha male locker room kind of competitiveness. I think it's great to be ambitious and want to be our best self, but I'm wondering, Mark, have you ever encountered it on any of the NYJC projects, or even in the conservatoires, and if you come across it, how you might manage it?
Yeah, so I think I have seen it. I think I've seen it everywhere, to be honest with you. It's an unfortunate byproduct of the process. I don't think it's necessary. I mean, I certainly will admit that I may have engaged in it, or certainly internally, felt it when I was young. I think felt it more than engaged in it, but certainly. And the thing I would have told my younger self was, it's a slow burn, it's a long process, and it's not affected by other people. So however good you are and however good Teena is, it doesn't affect me. I mean, it's brilliant for me. It's good. It's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing. I can still play the bass and enjoy it and make good music with people, however brilliant you two are, even if you're both bass players. There are enough gigs, and it's an inspiration, not a problem. Now, I understand when you're in close proximity to people and someone says, oh, Liz or Terry are fantastic, and, aren't they wonderful? And they sort of say it to you, and you think, well, I'm not wonderful and they are. And, these kind of things are tricky, but it's a long process, and it's not affected by other people in that way, and actually you can get into some real holes trying to kind of compete, because you take shortcuts, you look to exhibit things that you think will resonate with the people who were impressed by Liz or Terry or whoever it was, and those aren't the things that real musicians want to hear. The musicians that you aspire to play with want you, and want the depth and the personality you bring, not some kind of you know, what they call it, stunt playing that you perhaps pick up. And that's, you know, and I often say to students, don't worry about that stuff. I hear the music in you, and that's the important thing, not the other stuff. The pyrotechnics come and go quickly. You know, you can achieve them, and then you lose them. You know, they wear off on the audience. You know? Yeah. But just to finish, the thing is that great musical events are what stay with people. Beauty and community, and you know, those are the things that really resonate. Not you know, Evel Knievel as a reference to the 1970s, but you know.
That's a really lovely description as well. The fact that the music often doesn't benefit from that competitiveness as well. I mean, we want to find a way of serving the music well, making the actual sum of the outcome. Teena, I know we've had conversations about especially some of the environments that you've been working in, where you know, there is that real competitive locker room kind of mentality. Some of it's old school as well. So I was wondering whether you might share a bit of insight into that, about the type of things you experience, not necessarily with, you know, we don't want to out anyone or in any situation, but just sort of giving and sort of your own personal strategies of how you have come to stick around and blossom in such a beautiful way.
Well, I think for me, there have always been moments, probably when I was younger, especially when I was younger, when you're still trying to find your feet and you're still trying to find your place and say, well, you know, I can do this and I want to show how I can do that. And in one particular instance, when I was young, I couldn't get a look in a big band. I just used to stand there twiddling my thumbs. So my strategy for that was, I was student age. I just went out and got to know some of the people that are out there doing it that I really liked, and just formed a quartet. So that was how I got over that one. I didn't question it. That was the only time I allowed myself to be sort of pushed about or pushed out. The rest of the time, if I've ever come across anything where there's been a sort of either a peer pressure thing or a difference between, you know, the guys getting everything, the girls getting what's left. Again, it's always been a case of, I know what I can do, and I push myself beyond what I can do to see how far I can go, and then I know my limits. So I wouldn't try and sort of compete with somebody who I felt had already got that cornered if I didn't feel like it was within my limits, or I didn't want to do it, or I just didn't feel that way. But as far as dealing with being at work when you're faced up with some of these sort of things, again, it's not just girls that get pushed out, it's guys that get pushed out by guys as well, and girls get pushed out by girls. It's all about remembering to encourage each other. And if you're not receiving any of that, it's to remember to encourage yourself and remind yourself that you're there because of what you can do. So any other human failings that are going on around you, whether it be sexism, or whether it be jealousy, sometimes even, of somebody else's ability or popularity, I think the important thing is to just let that stamp around you and not be affected by it, unless it genuinely affects you, in which case you've got to speak up.
Yeah.
But I think most of the time I've found that if I just stick to my guns and just do what I do, and because I know I can do it, then other people can just have their problems around me. That's all right.
I think it's something that we as educators as well, facilitators, I think we take it more seriously, that we have a responsibility, and if we see it happening around us, we wouldn't just ignore it, that we actually work really hard. And I think that's changed a lot within the culture.
Sure, I was talking within, you know, my own
situation. No,
but
I'm just thinking as you describe it, I'm thinking, isn't it lovely that, you know, now generations that are younger than us are coming through where they've actually got educators that are rooting for them. And I know as a professional, like for example, working with a lot of the big bands, and there's also, which all three of us have experienced, the extremity of time pressure and finance as well. You know, you've got the financial pressure, and you need to get things done in a certain amount of time, and that can sometimes create a sort of stressful situation, which we sort of gradually learn to work in a very efficient and still creative way. I know another thing that we've also experienced, probably because we're all three of us very interested in that sort of cross genre, so we meet all sorts of different types of musicians, is those that feel that they sometimes feel a little bit intimidated about when we start to speak about the jazz language and the way that we work and improvising and things like that. And I'm wondering whether we might, we've had one of the Facebook questions that's come in is also from a music teacher who says that they're not a jazz expert and they'd love to work with, you know, their younger musicians, and how to introduce them and how to help and support them. So I'm wondering whether, first of all, we might talk about the actual lingo, the jazz lingo, and how we demystify it. And Mark, you were very involved in a project that we did where we actually put some videos together, and I was wondering whether you might share why you think that happened and how we went about it.
Yeah, brilliant. Can I just come back to one thing you talked, just to offer an idea or say something important? I think it needs saying in terms of potential sexism in the jazz environment or on music environment. I think it's really important that people, like you say, are educated, and education continues, and these things are talked about, and people don't pretend it doesn't happen, and people don't fear talking about it. Like, you know, like anything that's negative in any sort of work situation. Or I know myself, I was on a gig, on a concert with a female pianist, fantastic piano player. I didn't know her that well, and with some older jazz musicians, and they weren't sexist as such. Well, you can interpret it any way you like, but their language was just geared towards men. It was just the language of men, and there's references used, you know, various male and you realize that she was there, and I'm the bass player's kind of in the middle. He's a sort of he or she is a fulcrum, and I just thought this is totally alienating for this person, and it really brought home. I'd been aware of it, and we've talked about it, and I've seen, you know, obviously I'm very keen, but I just thought, you know, people still need to be educated and still need to learn, and the switch needs to be flicked, and just think, right, oh yes, that isn't appropriate. It just isn't used. That language isn't useful anymore.
Yeah,
absolutely.
No,
yeah.
so I think
Sorry.
No, just going to say. So, what a great job you're doing, of everyone, you know, and NYJC and everyone, just trying to make this a sort of flat playing field for everyone, because the music, your gender or your race, I feel, doesn't affect how you play music. We all have cultural references, but ultimately, it should be you know, border free, if you like. So onto your question. Hope you don't mind me saying that.
No, I really appreciate it. It's great what you said. Thank you.
So the lingo it's an interesting one. I mean, I think inevitably any endeavor has lingo. I mean, my wife's a doctor, and you can't believe the amount of lingo I've learned over the years. I mean, all kinds of stuff. I could probably pass myself off as a kind of dodgy kind of Harley Street, but anyway, so that's inevitable because they're shortcuts. So I think it's just demystifying some of that, and not being lazy, like I've just referenced. That language of those men in that moment was lazy, and I think one can be lazy and exclusive. I don't really buy into the idea that jazz is some mythical sort of shafts of divine light, you know, and it's not to be unpacked in any way, and we should keep it like that to sort of maintain this distance. I think the more inclusive the language, the better. We did some videos to that effect, just explaining some of the basic terms, which I thought was great, because ultimately you heard the term, and then we played something that personified that term. So ultimately your ears told you what it was rather than the dictionary.
Yeah.
And so I think that was great. We did quite a few of those, and that's very positive. And the
And
more of that we can do, I think affects the audience too, because it doesn't seem like this mystical, you know, a confusing sort of, they're just making it up as they go along sort of business. Which I haven't made anything up for about 20 years. I'm still playing the same thing. So as for making it up as I go along, I've never bought that. But all jokes aside, yeah.
And then we've put those on YouTube as well. And then there is a playlist. So if people go to the NYJC YouTube channel, we've put them all in a playlist now, Glossary of Term. And it's things like walking bass and comping, and even things like demonstrating an authentic counting to really imply the feel and the groove before you, and looking at some of those feels and grooves as well. And things like trades, you know, just things that we just trip off our tongue now. But there was always a point when we didn't know them as well. We've always been there. I remember sitting down in my first big band, and I'd come from being like an orchestral oboe player, always playing like lead oboe, and I'd have the big sweeping melodies and occasionally a little bit of, you know, chicken clucking in the background. But when I started playing baritone in the big band, it was like, why do people, there's no accent on the actual notation, but the syncopated feel, the rest of the sax section, we're putting these accents in, you know, and it's all of that, you know, sort of absorbing the culture by being around it and not being frightened to ask as well, because I did eventually go, why is it that you all know to accent on that note? But I think it takes quite a lot of courage sometimes to ask those questions. And so I think we advocate to anyone that's working with any of us as jazz musicians to definitely ask, because it's a very generous, generally speaking, it's a very generous community, and jazz musicians do like to talk and they do like to share, and they're also intrigued by like how a question can be asked in a slightly different way by someone who's not from the jazz community. You know, that often it's like, oh, I hadn't thought of seeing it that way. Teena, what about yourself and sort of demystifying things for other people? What sort of things do you do if you're working with a young musician, for example, who might have got to grade 3 or 4 piano and they really want to start to play some jazz? How might you go about sort of introducing them to it?
I think the first thing I'd do is I'd do what was done for me, which is to put together a collection of things that I think they would like to listen to that would be useful. Maybe three or four versions of the same tune by different people. That's what happened for me. I think it was the first person that did that for me was the drummer Trevor Tompkins.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I said, what should I be listening to? And he said, you just come here and I'll sort that. And we sat for hours and he just did all these things of different versions. And I picked the one I like. And then I tried to do some transcriptions of it, or just play along with it, or just listen to the feel of it. And then I kind of knew the questions to ask. And when I wasn't doing something right, or I said, well, I can't seem to like make that feel right, or I can't make that sound right, or I can't, how does Parker do that turn? Is it really twiddly widdly widdly? And then that's when you find out that it's more like flip rather than widdly widdly, and things like that come out of asking questions, as you said, Issie, and Mark. I think the whole thing about demystifying it is to first of all find out what they like, because then you're halfway there. If you find out when you give them stuff to listen to which one they liked, then they're already relating to it.
Yeah.
And they're already feeling it and enjoying the feeling of it. So then you can start working on maybe pulling a line out and working on a melody line, or working on the bass line, or checking how the comping's working, how much comping or how little comping's going on, and pulling it apart that way. Is that
yeah, and it coincides actually with one of the questions that's come in, which is a question that all of us have been asked a lot, because just to put it into context, you know, NYJC is 13 years old and we've been going around the country doing workshops for beginners, intermediate, advanced, and we work a lot with teachers and parents. And one of the most popularly asked questions is, what books would you recommend to help the young musician on their journey? And I've got my own personal answer to that, but I would like to open it up first of all and say, Mark, first of all, what's your answer to the question? Maybe from a rhythm section bass player's perspective.
It's a really good question. It's a really good question, and without going on too long about this, it opens a door into a whole conversation about whether books are the place to find this kind of information. I understand if I was learning a new skill, I would probably go to a book or something along those lines, or would hope to be able to find the information in a book. What the generations before would have said is it's all in the records. So it's about really listening to their music. I mean, what happens is, I notice this with undergrads and postgrads, is that they're keen as mustard to learn the music and learn how to play, but they think they can do that through conceptualizing it and learning techniques, almost like solutions. I have this kind of theory that often jazz is taught as a problem that needs solving. So you get this chord, and it's got these extensions on. How do you solve that? Well, you can play this scale, or you can relate it back to this family of harmony. And actually, and if you use this thing, you solve the problem. Jazz is an opportunity. Chords are opportunities. They're not problems waiting to be solved. We're not trying to cure anything. We're not trying to cure chords. We're trying to enjoy them. So I think the first thing to do is listen and find something, fall in love with something. Like Teena said, that's the moment as a teacher, you see someone go, oh, I really like that. And you think, wow, this is it. That's it. You caught the bug. No pun intended at the moment, but it's and that's the moment where anything's possible. You have to, and that's, so really you want to go about falling in love with it and just liking the sound. There are mechanical things. So bass players books, there's John Goldsby has a very good book about bass playing, about building the foundations. There's Ray Brown wrote a good book. There's loads of transcription books, but ultimately you have to learn the sound. A lot of people say, I've got young kids and say to me, oh, do they between 10 and 3? And they say, oh, are they musical? Can they play anything yet? And I said, well, I'm not worried about them playing anything yet. What they do is, my son can sing Lee Morgan solos and stuff like that. He can sing solos. And you think that's, whether you could ever, can he play them? Probably not, but he can sing them. And it's about internalizing the music and it going from outside to inside. And then the instrument becomes the conduit. And that's, in a way, that's the easiest bit. Although no one would want to tell you that as a music teacher. But yeah, anyway, that's so that's.
Also, it gives you a reason to put the practice in. I always think it's the carrot that you're dangling. Do you want to play this music? Doesn't it sound great? And then the youngster will, apply. And even things like practicing scales. It's like, I want to get inside that Dorian, A flat Dorian. It's a fiddly shape on the saxophone. If somebody had said you're going to do it for grade 6, it's an arduous task. If it's going to help you to get inside somebody like Coleman Hawkins playing, because it's going to, give you better access, then you'll do it gladly because you want to get inside that, like you say, the solo. Teena, what's your feeling about the going to books as the solution for learning the music?
Well, I mean, I'm pretty much feeling the same way as Mark, and probably yourself. I think the listening, the oral aspect of it, the listening is where I began, and picking the tunes out. And I think that's, for me, always going to be the way that will be the book, as far as getting the style and getting the sound is concerned. Andy Panay, I don't know if you've come across him recently, but he was in college with me, and we used to just go into a practice room together and stick a record on and try and catch as many of the melodies as we could, or try and join in with bits of it. He was often faster than I was. But I found that was really, that was really useful. Books, I suppose everybody, when you start out, and even now I use it, the real book, if I need to, because I play so many different styles. Sometimes I do still need a map, or I need a safety net occasionally. So the real book with all the melodies, and then trying to work out a bass line. I think that book has always been really useful to me.
Yeah.
I think there was one other thing I wanted to say. It's gone out of my mind. I'm sure it'll come back.
I think because one of the things that I realised, obviously, a lot of the people that are, especially working regularly and teaching and want to bring them this music into the teaching that they're doing with the youngsters, but it's about initially putting a bit of preparation time in, and that was often the issue, you know, finding the tunes that are going to suit the level that the youngsters are playing at. And so I think we've stepped in to help there, and we will, now that we've got our brand new website, if everybody would like to go and take a little look, it's all singing and dancing. We have got a page for online resources, and amongst ourselves we have generated some Spotify playlists which are like graded tunes. So we've got Spotify playlists of beginner tunes, intermediate, advanced. We've also got a list of sort of 100 standards that we recommend that when you get to sort of the end of a degree level that you should know when you go out into the world as a professional, and that, you know, you're sitting in jam sessions and things. But some of those are, you know, like Little Sunflower and All Blues and things like that are very you know, approachable now. So we've streamed those, so we will put those online as well. And then some of the demystifying of just what some of the chord symbols mean, or you know, some of the scales. That I think the Mark Levine book is really good, both the piano book and the history book, and piano book and the theory book. And I think the nice thing about that is it refers back to the recordings as well, so you actually hear it in context. And then finally, don't be shy to ask jazz musicians that you know as well, because I know I've learned so much from people by asking a question. And some of the logic of the modes, I remember I did 16th century harmony as part of my when I was studying composition, so I sort of knew of the existence of the modes, but I didn't know how they were being related to standard harmony that was in, you know, tunes. And it was really helpful just stopping in a break and saying to a pianist, you know, what chord symbol would you use for that chord? And now, as I use things that are much more sort of like Messiaen and much more contemporary style harmony in my writing, you know, I'm always still sort of taking it to pieces and trying to work out what the structure is and how I would spell it in a jazz symbol. So it's like you say, both of you have said, it's an ongoing process as well, isn't it? And also get the younger students to learn from the older students as well. Don't take the full responsibility on to your own shoulders and think that you've got to be all things to all people. It's nice for them to have a number of different people to be talking to. But I think, like you both say, it is ultimately going to the source, because when the music excites you and you've heard it, then you will stick around it and invest that time. But if someone hands me a piece of paper, even like a beautiful Pat Metheny tune, if it's handed to me initially as a piece of paper, it's going to take me a while to get excited about it. But if we're in your car and you put that track on, I'm like, I can't wait to get there because we're going to play it. So it's worth investing.
Can I say one thing? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sorry, I do apologise for interrupting. I think on the matter of books, I totally understand why this question comes up so often. But if you liken it to, I don't know, football, for instance, you would probably get a coach or a teacher, and if you were working through a book, they could guide you through that book to some extent. It would be very hard to learn football or hockey or something from simply a book, and probably wouldn't expect to, would you?
Yeah.
You know, you would think, well, we'll get a coach or I'll join a team. And I think a teacher is a way to, if you are going to use a book, at least they can help you relate to that book. So a book on its own is probably not quite enough.
Also to you know, believe in your own musicianship skills as a teacher, and that it may take you a little while with the first two tunes, you know, spending a bit of time listening to it on the record, getting inside it, so that then you can start to share some of it with your young students. But remember, that's a good investment, that you'll have that in your portfolio of tunes that you can teach not just that group of youngsters, but for the coming years as well. And it feeds into your next sort of understanding of the music, so you yourself will grow as a musician. And I don't think there's anything wrong with feeling like, you know, you're a few steps ahead in the first few years of the youngsters, because ultimately there will be a time when that becomes much more second nature and your musicianship grows with it. I think it's like we were saying, not to be frightened of the music as a youngster. It's also the same as a teacher as well. I often say to, you know, people when they say, oh, but I'm not an expert jazz musician, I said, it's really interesting, because if I go and work with some peripatetics and they're teaching grade 5 trumpet, they don't expect themselves to play like the lead trumpet player in the LPO. But if we go and do some beginner music with improvisation, that they feel great responsibility that they've got to play like Pat Metheny or, you know, Coleman Hawking or Ray Brown. And it's like, no, even Ray Brown didn't play like that when he was at this part of the journey. Not quite. Anyway.
Sorry, can I just say something on that point? Yeah, I think what's really important is the singing of a melody or the singing of a bass line, no matter what your voice is. So, I mean, even if you've got teachers that are trying to teach stuff and they might think, oh, I don't think I'll get my hands around that or whatever. If they just get everybody singing it, whether it's a melody line or a bass line, then everyone can sing something. You don't have to be able to get your fingers around it or you know, your lip around it, whatever it is. And I think that's a great key, because once you're hearing the melody and then you start hearing maybe a solo you want to play, even if you haven't quite got that under your hands yet, if you're hearing it, you can do half of it. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I remember we once did some CPD in Norwich, and as we left, you know, as we were signing off, one of the tutors who was the head of a department at one of the jazz courses, one of the jazz colleges, turned to the peripatetic and said, basically what we've done today isn't jazz, it's musicianship. And I think that's ultimately to not be tempted to keep running to the manuscript and writing things down, but just to have that slow burn that Mark was talking about earlier on, about developing your and the students' musicianship skills as well, making them musically more independent and you know, able to, like you say, sing it first and then play it back, and not be in a hurry. That's the other thing we've noticed when we do our CPD sessions, that a lot of them say, I didn't realize that you were going to spend that amount of time on that one thing, you know, because we want to, it's not just about rattling through a tune, is it? It's much deeper than that. So do you want to maybe share a few insights from the regional work that we did, Mark, when we were going to Rotherham and different places?
Yeah. Well, it was some amazing trips, weren't there, and interactions. I must say, well, the first thing I remember is that how many of those students I've seen in conservatoires, and you know, we really had incredible response, and some fantastic musicians came out of those areas and still continue to. I don't know whether NYJC is still active in those areas, but things like Cornwall, I teach quite a few people from Cornwall. Oh, I know this person, there's a community, and I don't know whether we, you know, more you than me, but helped start that, and that would be amazing. And that's incredible. I noticed that people are looking for, understandably, looking for quick answers, you know, quick solutions. Like I say, the idea of the problem that needs solving. It's an opportunity to make music, and that's an amazing. That was one of the great things when we made music, and the people we taught played together and clearly enjoyed that above the sort of technical accomplishments of what they'd done. Just enjoyed playing together, and ultimately, excuse me, that was what I've enjoyed for X number of decades I've been doing it. That's that moment of interaction and community is the thing, not necessarily, well, I've just you know, I've just scaled this enormous chord sequence that's, you know, aren't I clever? No, and so just get playing with each other, enjoy the moment, you know, whether it be in a sort of funk jam or you're playing a sensitive ballad, just enjoy. And that's what the thing that I noticed the most. We went all over the country and had all kinds of responses, and we did quite a lot of professional development too, didn't we, which was interesting. The thing I would say to any teacher who's looking to teach jazz, please do it, however hard it may seem, please do it, because it's a wonderful music, and don't worry about it. You don't have to be, you know, you can be in it together with them. I mean, you know, look, we're learning together. I have a bit more experience, but I mean, that's what I said. And, you know, as I said, my wife was a doctor, and she talks about being peers in training or partners in training. So you're effectively all in it together. We're just different stages of the process.
Absolutely.
So, you know, that's my thought.
Well, so before we round off, I just want to say that obviously the NYJC is very passionate about the work we do, and I'm very careful when I'm choosing the tutors that I work with, that I really need to feel that they share that passion and that consideration for the young musician and the teachers, and both of you are stellar examples of that. And definitely, as you play in a group as well, but the way that you support all of those young musicians. So if there's anybody out there that feels you'd like to support us in our work, because the other thing that we're committed to doing is making sure that the work is accessible, and there are people that have got, you know, financial barriers that would prevent them if we made it very expensive. So we're really careful to build up reserves for bursaries. So if you'd like to contribute to that, there's a link on this post which you can contribute to, and obviously more so now than ever it would be really helpful, because I know that a lot of the youngsters are really struggling they feel very isolated, and their love of the music is something that they really want to stay connected with. Very few schools and music services are giving them anything online at the moment, so it's all core curricula, and we're already doing a lot of online work, and we're going to be sending out a newsletter in a couple of weeks' time to talk about the activities we're putting online over the summer as well. And then also to say that next week we'll be joined by Zosa Cole and Alexander Riddell, both of whom are winners of the Young Jazz Musician of the Year 2016 and 2018. And we worked with both of those through NYJC, so it's been wonderful to see them blossom, and we're very much looking forward to hearing what they're up to now. But going back to the early days of when you first started, Teena, I think you're going to play us out. You actually, next to the bridge is the very piano that you're looking on. It must have been a very cold childhood. So what's you going to play for us? First of all, can I thank you, Mark, very much for the conversation. It's been wonderful, and it's been lovely catching up with you this week as well to prepare for the summer school, and I'm really looking forward to working together this summer. I'd like to thank Nick Brown as well for helping us get online, and Teena, to thank you as well, and I'm very much looking, I know Mark and I are both looking forward to working with you over the summer. But would you tell us what it is you're going to play, and we're going to sign off and leave you to it. So over to you, Teena.
Okay, thank you. Well, I am playing on the piano that I was bought as a kid, so it's not perfect, but that's why I like it. I'm going to play a tune that I wrote called Passion Flower, Waiting for the Dawn. I'll just play the head straight through.